All right. Hopefully everybody can see this pretty good and everything, and we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, just make sure your microphones are muted, cameras are turned off. Just remember that right here where you can use that bubble, you can ask questions if necessary. Don't, feel free to do that. When I'm presenting this morning, I'm not going to be able to monitor the chats just yet, but what we'll do is that hopefully towards the end of the program, I'll be able to go back and reemphasize some of the questions. The good part about this program, since we are recording it, you can go back and listen to it. Now, today, myself, I will be talking. I'm the County Extension Agent for Horticulture here in Montgomery County. We also have Linda Crum. She is one of our master gardeners here, and also Bob Dailey. Linda's going to be talking about a little bit about plant selection, basically native plants for the landscape. And Mr. Dailey is going to be talking a little bit about water conservation, especially in lawns. Like I said earlier, this program is going to be recorded. And in about 7 to 10 days, you'll receive an email from us with all the handouts, including the copy of the presentation in PDF form. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about in my talk, I'll actually give you backup information like a chore chart for Montgomery County when it comes to lawn maintenance. And also there's a handout that's going to be weed and feed. It's all about weed and feeds and why we don't really want to use them in our area. So a lot of the supporting handouts and those things will be be given to you through email. And then also give a link to the recorded program that will be on YouTube. Also, in the email, you receive a link to a survey. Please, please, please fill out the survey. That helps us provide, what kind of programs and everything that you want. It kind of gives us an idea of the things that you may be looking at as far as information you need. Not only do you have good sources here in Montgomery County, myself and the master gardeners to ask, but also the classes that we can provide for you. So please fill that out. There's good information and everything that needs to be shared with us so we can continue doing what we do. So to start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about current lawn problems or chores. I'm not going to get in really, really big detail with any of this, just some of the things that we're seeing right now or some of the things you need to be thinking about. I'm also going to talk a little bit about landscape renovation / design. A lot of people at some point in time get disappointed with their landscape or their plants, and they don't know, what to do about it. So we're going to kind of go through an evaluation process and kind of talk about some of those things. All right. So some of the lawn chores, a lot of times I hear, since I'm kind of the grass guy and I get to deal with a lot of these grass questions, I always hear, oh, my grass is thin, I get large patch, I have take-all patch, I get chinch bugs every year, grass just doesn't look healthy, I have lots of weeds, those kind of things. So the basic principle of what I do and what most people should do is evaluate why. Why are you getting, why is your lawn thin? Why are you getting bugs every time? Why are you, having these issues? There's something that is contributing to it, whether it be external or internal issues, maintenance, maybe it's over fertilization, over watering. So there's a lot of things that contribute to the issues that we see. The main thing with having a healthy turf grass is an optimum system. You right amount of sunlight. If your grass is thinning and it's in shady areas, you may not be getting enough sun. Maybe it's the soil structure. Maybe there's certain areas of the lawn that just have a little bit different. Maybe it's more coarse in one area and it drains better. Maybe one area holds more moisture than another. Sometimes it's mowing height, water quality. Sometimes especially out in the country areas where you're off of a well or something like that. pH is of course very important. Sometimes a higher pH turf grasses, are more susceptible to some of your fungal issues. And of course, having a balanced nutrient and good water as far as quantity. So balance kind of is the key when it comes to that. So these are some things that I kind of like people to think in advance on, because it's not something you can just say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go do this now. These are things you kind of need to plan ahead and say, I probably could benefit for either Errification or a top dressing this year. Well, the biggest thing is with those two things, you need to kind of plan in advance, because sometimes financially it is a little bit more costly to do these things, whether you're going to be renting a machine yourself or you're going to be having somebody else do it. But timing is very important, meaning the timing that you do an aerification versus and a top dressing. It's very important, just kind of like fertilization. So mainly the biggest thing is don't do it when the grass has, like when you have extreme drought or extreme heat issues. Don't do it if the lawn is diseased, if you have disease issues, because you'll just be spreading it even more. And plus, when you do either one of these processes, it weakens the turf grass. So if I'm already weak, I'm going to get sicker because, you know, something was done to it. So just make sure your lawn is healthy if you're going to be doing this. So you basically, you don't want to do it during the winter, or, you know, even in the middle of the summer, or too late in the fall. You want to make sure you're doing it probably that late April, maybe May time frame, or either a September or early October. You want to have at least 4 to 6 weeks of good growing conditions before you do an aerification or a top dressing. You want to basically, you want to make sure that turf grass is actively growing. So when it comes to aerification, there's several reasons why we do it. The first, you know, primary method is compaction. Of course, you know, golf courses have high traffic, and so they get watered a lot as well. So there's not enough oxygen sometimes to get to the root system. So in order to do that and make sure that they get enough oxygen, there's an aerification process that needs to be done. So that's, you know, basically when you do an aerification process, let's say you have somebody that mows your lawn all the time and they're using big heavy mowers. Well, about every 2 to 3 years, you may want to consider doing an aerification, just because you want to loosen up that soil, provide that air that's much needed. So you can see here the difference between a non-compacted soil. There's loose, there's air that's available in there, and with a compacted soil, it's real tight, and you just don't have the air. So here's kind of a little bit better display of, you know, kind of what happens with an aerification. One of the other reasons why we do an aerification sometimes is to get rid of thatch layers. There's also dethatchers. In our area, I really don't see a lot of thatch problems, just very rarely. But typically, thatch problems are created by over-fertilization and lack of mowing at the proper timing. So, of course, compacted soils is the other reason. But you can also see that the water and nutrients and everything penetrate further down into the ground. You have a much, you know, better root system and deeper roots as you have air and you have, you know, less compacted soil. So there's 2 different types out there. If anybody's ever seen the ones that, you know, you put on your shoes and you can walk around in the grass, you know, they're spikes. They're like this one on the right-hand side, the solid tine. I know that there's soils that you could try to step on, but you probably won't go in but about 1/4 of an inch. But you know, those are okay, and they can be done. And in fact, a lot of sports field places will use those certain times of the year. But then ultimately, the most beneficial and the best way to do it is a core aeration. And on this right-hand picture, left-hand side of the screen, you can see that's a core aerator. It pulls out a core that's maybe, you know, 1/2 inch in diameter and about 4 to 5 inches long, and it pulls it out of the ground, and it allows for that soil to expand. And if you think about, you know, the difference between a tine and a core basically forces the ground to separate, and right next to where that tine is, there's another tine. So you have 2 tines that are pushing closely together, and it's compacting the soil in between it. So that's why it's really not as beneficial as a core aeration. So here you can see there was some studies that were done and things that were done on certain houses up in North Texas, where they did some compacted clay versus, you know, somebody that's come in and done some topsoil or top dressing. You can see the difference right there. You know, you get, with a clay soil, of course, when it dries out severely. The good thing about clay soils is that they can maintain or hold moisture quite readily. And when you get adequate rainfall, like we do in our area, clay soils are very beneficial. And I always kind of brag about this, but I only water about twice a year, every year. And it tends to be in the very hottest parts of the summer, just when the grass needs it. And that's all I do. I don't have to water once a week because we typically get the amount of rainfall that we need over time. But that's if you have a good root system for your turf grass. Typically, and I like to make the comment, it's not grass that's the water waster, it's the person who controls the water. So topsoil applications are also very much same timing as a core aeration. So, like I said, this is something to kind of think ahead on. All you need as far as to top dress is a good sandy loam or something like that, even compost, but the same time frame, April-May time frame, late April to early May time frame is good, and then September to early October is also good. Half-inch maximum per year, okay? If you do any more than half an inch, you're going to smother it, hence the picture on the right-hand side. This is actually my front lawn about 3 or 4 years ago. We had some problems with a lot of water standing in that area. And that area, I mean, it took 6 inches to 8 inches of soil to get the water to drain away from the house. I was having water sit in my landscape for days. This was kind of about the era of Harvey and some of those other fronts, those storms that came through. So I had water sitting there and I couldn't get water away from the house. It just sat there and then killed my grass. Well, now, and you can see I even raised up my landscape beds, kind of made them a little bit more raised up. Now my water drains away from the house and out to where it needs to go. And that's if you have drainage issues. And the good thing about doing any kind of top dressing is that if you have low-lying areas or holes or divots in your yard where you have a little bit, lower areas, you can always fill those in. You can always get those more smooth. Those kind of areas where you have where they're lower, you tend to get problems with large patch a little bit more readily. And so those areas you can fill in and kind of level out the lawn a little bit. You may smother the area, but just remember the grass will grow back. It should be actively growing, so the grass around it should start to grow back in. Now, in this situation here, I basically came back in and I went ahead and sodded the area just because it'd be a lot quicker and I didn't have to wait as long. Like I said, compost, sandy loam, sand, those would be some of the options as far as what you need. Sand is one of those that if you have really, really wet areas that stay wet for a long period of time, that are very clay or very compacted, sand might be a good option, but typically a good sandy loam or compost would work just fine. The good thing about a compost is, guess what? It not only helps with your drainage, it'll help with fertilization. So some other things. A lot of times we have this problem where you put something weed killer down and maybe about half your lawn it dies all of a sudden. Well, maybe half the lawn was weeds and you just didn't know it. I kind of have the other kind of saying with that, if you keep it mowed, nobody ever know that there are weeds. So green is good. In my neighborhood, I was kind of running through Facebook one day and all of a sudden I saw this guy post about how this product had killed his entire lawn. And basically he had St. Augustine grass. The problem was he used a product that was for Bermuda grass. So it actually killed his entire lawn. He was mad at the company and everything else, but the problem is that basically he should have read the label. It's very important to read labels. Make sure that you're buying or purchasing the right product for your type of lawn, number one. Number two, we typically don't recommend any weed and feed products here because the timing of fertilization and the timing of putting out pre-emergence is very, very different. This is one of the handouts that you'll be getting. It's my lawn care chore chart. You can see, and I kind of have a little bit of a goof here. I had to move some of the stuff over, but in this one area, I'm going to see if I can get my tray to work. Oops. No, can't get the little thing to work. It's okay. There we go. Okay, so pre-emergent for warm season annuals needs to take place right about now. If you're going to put a pre-emergent down, put a pre-emergent down now. Now, you can see fertilization. Fertilization does not need to take place until after maybe April 1st, up until maybe mid-May. And that's when fertilization, that's when grass actively grows. If you put a fertilizer down now, which would be some type of weed and feed, you're putting down a fertilizer that's basically going to sit there because the turf grass is not growing. It's dormant. They're warm season grasses. Even though they grow very slowly, in some cases, depending on our weather, the fact is a lot of that fertilization is going to go right past the root system, and it's just not be beneficial. You're wasting your money. So when I ask you in your survey later, if you can you see any benefit to what we've taught you today, hopefully those of you that have been maybe fertilizing incorrectly or at the wrong time of the year, you can realize that I'm saving you money, because if you've done this in the past and you fertilized too early, you've wasted some of your money. So you can see that right there as far as when to put your pre-emergent down. And then for your fall weeds, which are the weeds that we're seeing right now, your fall application does a lot of your fall and winter weeds. You're looking at, September. I kind of like to say early September because sometimes we get a late September cold front. But typically you can basically say September 15th to maybe October 15th. It just depends on the weather. And that's the whole thing. I'm not a weatherman. Unfortunately, Mother Nature does all that. So I can't take credit, but I can always take blame, I guess. But weather is one of those things that we just don't have any control over. But the fact is that just keep an eye out on some of those things. And, if they say, hey, a cold front's coming, or something like that, especially with large patch, you can get ahead of it. But as far as your pre-emergents, if you put them out in the fall, September 15th to the end of September, that's a good time to do it. Sometimes you may want to break that application up into 2 applications, meaning, if it says, 6 pounds per 1,000 square feet, you may want to break it up into 3 pounds. And then 4 to 6 weeks after you make the first application, you want to make another application. And this kind of helps you kind of prolong the effects of that pre-emergent throughout the season. Also, most of the time, a lot of the weed and feed products have both have a pre-post emergent in it. One of them, the active ingredients, is called atrazine. Atrazine can do damage to trees and shrubs. And also atrazine is one of those that when temperatures get too high, it can burn your grass. So you kind of have to watch certain things like that. And a lot of times those labels will tell you. Let's see, I see that there might be a question. I'll get to it here in a minute. This, of course, the weather, it can make timing of these things pretty much an issue. Oops, here we go. So one of the questions, pre-emergent, same as weed killer? No, not necessarily. Pre-emergents are kind of like saran wrap for your lawn. Okay, it basically creates a layer on the top of the soil that's like saran wrap, and it doesn't keep the weeds from germinating. The weeds still germinate. It's when they come in contact with the pre-emergent that it actually disrupts their growth at that point in time, and it kills them. Or it's a growth inhibitor for some weeds. So pre-emergent is not the same as a weed killer. Pre-emergent would be like prodiamine, barricade, dimension. There's a whole bunch of different ones out there. You just kind of have to know what kind of weeds you have. The fact is, if you don't have weeds, don't apply pre-emergent. You don't need it. Okay. So how to treat Florida betony. That's one of those, Mr. Hale. Send me an email if you don't mind, and I'll give my contact information towards the end, and I'll share with you some of the publications and everything specifically about Florida betony. How can you manage wet, soggy areas from septic sprinklers run daily and all year long? I think that would be better suited, something like, I think sand in those areas would definitely help, because, sand's very coarse. It'll allow for penetration, and it may be that you have to put maybe, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of sand in those areas to help it drain better. At least that way it can still be walked on or managed as far as mowing. All right. So some of the weeds that we're going to be seeing and starting to see right now, of course, our annual bluegrass, which is your Poa annua. There's an actual big research study that's going on right now because Poa annua has been, it's been shown that it is resistant to some of the pre-emergents. or it's gaining resistance. So the best thing to do is to alternate pre-emergence from year to year, or even season to season. So every fall, when you're treating for your fall and winter weeds, you would alternate to a different pre-emergent, so you could keep these from being resistant. So typically, you know, mid-September timeframe is a good time to do that. Like I said, I'm going to be attaching PDF documents when you get the email from this program that'll have detailed descriptions of some of the products and things like that in it. The other one, of course, we're starting to see onset of different types of clovers, wood sorrels, and all kinds of other type of winter weeds. They're all considered broadleaf weeds. Henbit's going to be coming around. And then also chickweed. We've been seeing quite a bit of chickweed already this year. And so some of those, you know, sometimes if you just, you know, mowing these things down will also help this time of year. This also help, you know, kind of mulch up your leaves, and that way you have organic matter back into the soil. But there are products that can be used to treat some of these. Of course, you have your south thistle. And here's some of the products that are used to control your broadleaf weeds. You know, and keep in mind, here's the one that's in the middle, the image for St. Augustine and centipede grass. It does have atrazine. So it's very important that you don't get that, you know, close to your trees and shrubs. I like to tell people, you know, instead of doing a whole yard application, you know, try just spot spraying the areas that need to be controlled. Because I doubt that everybody's entire yard is completely scattered with weeds unless you've just never done a darn thing to it. So if you at least do some spot treatments with that, that'll help you as far as saving money, especially on some of these products that can be quite costly. And that's some of the things that are going on right now. So the whole thing about weeds, you know, what do I do? The main thing is have the weeds identified, or weeds identified. You can do photos through email, through the Master Gardener email, mcmga9020@gmail.com, or you can send them to me, mpotter@ag.tamu.edu. I like to see photos of weeds. I also, you may even see your photos in one of my presentations eventually, so you never know. Just don't send pictures of your yard, so because they will show up in my presentation, especially if they look good or bad. So you can drop off, you know, whole plant samples and everything, or bring photos into our office at 9020 Airport Road. We have master gardeners that work in the at the help desk, the helpline, and they answer the phones as well as answer some of your questions when you have walk-in type questions. And then most of the time, if they're not there, then most of the time I'll get them and I'll be able to answer your questions. The main thing about weeds is don't panic. Just keep in mind that you can't just control everything in one treatment. It doesn't work that way. Most of the time you have to come up with a management plan in order to get not even control, because control is never going to be 100%. You have a lot of other factors that contribute to weeds moving around. You have animals, you have wind, you have rain. So weeds are always going to be there. A weed is a plant too, just depending on how you look at it. But if you keep it mowed and you keep it managed properly, you shouldn't have an issue with weeds. Once they get down to a level that is manageable, and that's really what I like to say, if getting weeds to a manageable level, then you can reduce, to go back and not use pre-emergent. You can go back and maybe not use a post-emergent product like some of those broadleaf weeds. The main thing is just be patient. So fungal issues, they can persist throughout the winter. This is my lawn. It is in dormancy mode. Now, oh my gosh, I must over-fertilize or over-water because I have brown patch, or aka large patch. The fact is that whenever my family, we go on a trip or go somewhere, we have a cooler with ice. And so my daughter, my son, or whoever's, or even me sometimes, will throw the ice out into an area. Well, that's the area. I created an environment to allow it to get large patch. So the temperature was right, the moisture was right, it grew. Large patch does not ever stop. It's there, it's always present. There's nothing you can do to eradicate it. The other sad fact is I don't fertilize. So there you go. Why did I get it? It was the conditions were absolutely right for the development of that fungus. So, and it just happens to be just a little bit of a low spot that developed after I'd already filled everything in. So, so it just had the right temperature, 70 degrees or below. I always say, when you get into that, and typically we see this more in the fall time frame than we do in the spring. But like I said, it can persist throughout the year. But typically in the fall, if you're one of those people who wants to go ahead and put out a pre-emergent, a preventative fungicide treatment, you would wait to, when they say, hey, we're going to have a cold front, it's going to drop temperatures below 70 at night, we're going to be in the 60s. If you were to be a week ahead of that and put out a fungicide, you could use that fungicide as a preventative. A fungicide is not a curative. You can't just put a fungicide out and expect it to go away. It doesn't work that way. So fungicides are preventative, not curative. Take all root rot, those symptoms don't even begin until mid-spring, and it'll progress into the fall. So it's a totally different thing. Next month, I'm going to be talking more on turf. So we'll go probably through that a little further next time. This is what happens when you totally mismanage your lawn with large patch. This was my neighbor across the street. He was over talking to me one day and said, hey, he said, whoa, we were, totally unrelated. He turned around, looked at my lawn, looked at his lawn, and goes, what's wrong with my lawn? I said, well, your guys fertilized after like the second cold front of the season, and they fertilized. So it was almost into November. And the next thing you know, it just took his whole lawn. So his lawn is always, it's taken a couple of years to come back because it was just damaged so bad because it took almost the whole lawn. So just be careful when you fertilize. Okay, so now I'm going to get into a little bit about, let me go and see if I can see if there are any questions potentially. Okay, after aeration, I usually sprinkle some expanded shale in parts of the area. Can you comment on the benefits of that or not? Well, anything that you do to increase air holding capacity or increase air into the soil is a good thing. Expanded shale just on top, it's gonna allow for. I mean, it's like adding sand. It's gonna allow for water to penetrate through, but as far as the logistics of the soil, it's not going to really improve the soil until it starts moving down into the soil. So if you after an aeration, if you do a core aeration and you put it out there and it goes into the holes, yes, because it's going to benefit getting down in there. It's going to add some porosity. It's going to let your water flow a little better. And it does have some kind of little bit of nutrient things. All right. So let's get back into the presentation. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about landscape renovation and design. Identify your problem areas. Sometimes it's shade, sometimes it's water. You may get too much or not enough in certain areas. Sometimes it's just the plant age. Maybe those plants are, just completely, they're just old. They're beyond their life cycle, so they need to be replaced. So keep in mind that there's a lot of things to look at. Your plants may be thinning out. They may be just not leafing out the way they should. There's a lot of research involved kind of in the preliminary processes of landscape design or renovation. The main thing, you need to have a good map, a good base map of your property to start with, so you can kind of know where things are. You can kind of know different things about the property, which is your site analysis. Where my electrical lines run, where are the boxes for cable, where are, where's the irrigation lines, where are all these things that affect or sometimes affect the property. And your site inventory also includes, or your analysis also includes, how the sun rises and sets during different times of the year. And also, of course, the plant selection part of that. What type of plants are you looking for? Is it the same ones? Okay, somebody's having problems with their computer. So sites, plant selection is very important. I think probably one of the biggest things a lot of people don't do, especially when they're doing a landscape renovation or even kind of a larger project, it's the call before you dig. That's something that needs to be done. So that is a good time to, you know, if you're going to be expanding your landscape or anything like that, to do that just so you can identify hazards. Power lines, water lines, main water lines, TV and cable lines, or other utilities that are there. They come out and mark all that for you. That way you know. Also, you know, when it comes to base map preparation, you can do maybe a copy of the deed. Maybe it's the house plans that you have, or maybe even a property survey or some type of topographical survey, or you can do it yourself. Typically, whenever I've used to do landscape design and stuff, I would just draw it out myself. It's just the best way. That way I can kind of figure out where everything is, and I can do my site analysis at the same time that I'm doing my base map. You know, typically, you know, just a tape measure, and kind of have to have a checkoff list of all the things you're looking for, and of course, needs and wants. And whenever I see needs and wants, we all want the ultimate landscape, but sometimes what we need is something easier to take care of. And that's when I used to do a lot of landscape designing and stuff for clients many years ago. I used to do kind of a checkoff sheet. I used to ask them about, you know, how they're, you know, what kind of things do they do in their lives, you know, pets, you know, what kind of traffic flow do they want, you know, if they, you know, have grandchildren, what do they do, you know, entertainment, what do they like to do outside, you know, what kind of gardens do they like, what kind of theme, what kind of plants do they like, you know, I specified go out and drive around, see what kind of plants you like, you know, colors. I know with my wife, she always tells me every time we move or we're in a different location, no pink. She does not like pink, so we don't do pinks. So, you know, those are the types of things you kind of need to know right offhand as far as what you're going to be doing as far as your analysis is concerned. So, and the biggest thing is really the plant materials. You need to get in there and, you know, go to the nursery, walk through the nursery, see things, see different things. You know, when you really get down into good landscape designing, you can have plants that bloom all year round in your landscape. It just has to be designed a certain way to know when plants bloom. So a good base map, like I said, you can start, you know, drawing your own. I always like to put and make sure that I know where windows are, doors, access points to the houses, because those are areas where it may require safety. A lot of times we have the old school method of, you know, mustache shrubs. You know, they're all in a row. There's 5 of them, and they cover a window, or cover windows, and those shrubs are right there close to a front door. So it's a good place for somebody to hide in or things like that, or, you know, it's right close to a water spigot, so they need to be moved out further. There's a lot of little things that you got to think about when you're redesigning or doing a landscape. But don't block windows unless you're going to be using, you know, shrubs that are only get so high, and you have you know, birds or butterflies or something like that you like to attract. So make sure you're selecting the right plants. So here's just kind of a, I always start out with just kind of a base deal. I start working into my plan, my base mapping. You know, always want to mark my north, mark my property lines, know the distance between the property lines and the house. You know, covered patios, you know, what kind of landscapes are already present, driveways, ingress, egress areas, fencing, gating. So you go through all of this and you just identify things that are already there. Then you start to identify things like sun, shade. So you can actually do with a sun shade study, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. You know, wind. What do your predominant winds come from? You know, where do they come? How do they blow across the property? Sometimes you have breezeways and everything that the wind speeds up. So you kind of have to know that in some cases. Are there noise or visual issues? What about drainage problems? So when it comes to sun and shade, you kind of need to know how the sun moves across your property. That way you can find out, you know, hey, gosh, I get 8 hours of shade over here. There's not much I'm going to be able to grow. Well, maybe that's a sitting area now, or maybe you can, you know, put landscape rocks of some type and do some type of different type of landscaping for those areas. Or maybe, you know, mother-in-law's tongue or something, but you got to be careful too, because don't worry, Maybe the snakes might hide in there. So you have to make and really think about all these considerations. So you can also have seasonal heating and cooling. You know, maybe on one side of the house you want shade during the summer, but you don't necessarily want it during the winter because you want it to heat the house. And you also need to identify your hot areas. Maybe there's some areas that get really hot, and by adding a large shade tree in that area, or small shade tree, just depending on what size yard you have, and just remember, right plant for the right place, you can create shady areas, and you can maybe even have some of the cooling effects. So you also need to think, you know, it can definitely affect your indoor and outdoor heating and cooling needs. So here's kind of an idea of, you can see right here, you know, the structure. You can see where it casts shade, and this is, you know, summer shade. Your winter shade is a little different just because of the way the sun passes across the sky. So during the winter, most of the time we get a lot more shade in some of those already shaded areas during the summer, just depending on how your house faces. So, you know, take into account, you know, how that sun goes across the sky. Now, one of my master gardeners, and I think I saw her name in here, we were talking very early on about doing, you know, she was saying how some of her plants weren't doing well and her lawn doesn't do well in certain areas. I said, well, you know, let's go out and take pictures from the same area every hour on the hour. Because a lot of times people don't realize how much shade they actually get. And filtered light is good in some cases, but how much is that filtered light? If you're only getting, you know, an hour or two of direct sun on a St. Augustine lawn, which is the most shade tolerant turf grass we have, it's not going to be enough. But if you get maybe 40 or 50% filtered light throughout the rest of the day, then the grass will be a little bit healthier. You still have to do some other things like reduce your watering, reduce your fertilization, and raise your mower up, but those are still adequate. You know, it would still grow adequately in that situation. Now, if you get 6 hours of shade all day long, heavy shade, and maybe an hour or two of sun, then there's a problem. But you can see she identified some of the areas that she's having problem with, and you can see how much actual shade that there is. I like this method. It's a very good visual for what some of the problems are. And sometimes, like I said, it's maybe just the age of the plants. Wind, sometimes your prevailing winds. I know living down in South Texas for as long as I did, you know, when you had a Southeast Texas 35-mile-an-hour wind every day, it got to be annoying. So there was times where you plant things or do some type of screening to kind of block that wind to make it more manageable, or at least, yeah, you could actually hear yourself think. So the other thing is, you know, noises. You can buffer noises by using certain things, either from traffic, neighbors, you know, especially those nosy neighbors that you just really can't deal with. You can also just, you know, do this and tell them what you think too. But in my instance, like my house and my backyard, there's a gentleman he's a salesman for, I don't even know what he does. Well, I do know what he does, but I'm not going to say it. So he's a salesman, and he is always on the phone all day long, and he's out in his back porch. So what I did is I planted some vines across the whole entire back fence to give us a buffer. It actually does kind of squelch at least some of the noise we have to hear during the day. So after I'm all said and done, I've taken my pictures and everything. I can show you like the +6. That's, you know, how many hours of shade I get. I did this in the amount of hours of shade, not the amount of hours of sun, but the amount of shade. And my blue lines over on the right-hand side are showing an issue with water, where the water comes from, how it drains across my backyard. So you can see how I've kind of identified the different areas of my lawn. And if you do that and everything, you can be successful, at least of narrowing down the type of plants and everything you want for your property. Some of the last steps to kind of consider, you know, select the appropriate plants, you know, bird, butterfly, native, you know, there's earth kind, there's superstars, there's all kinds of good plants out there. Just make sure you're getting the right plants. You know, take some time. Don't get impatient with that process. You know, if you most of the time when we get impatient with things, we can kind of mess it up a little bit and not make the right selections. You may like a plant so darn much that you're gonna try to make it grow in that one corner of the lawn or that one corner of the property that it's just not going to grow. So you just remember to select the right the right place, right plant, plant at the right time, and plant it the right way. Mulch is very important for landscapes. It does help disseminate a lot of the rainfall and everything. It helps it percolate into the ground a lot easier. Many years ago, we did a study that was on row crops, and they would strip the ground on one side, just nothing but dirt, and on the other side, they would put a whole bunch of debris on it, and they had this big PVC pipe distribution that would simulate an inch an hour rain, and so they would run this inch an hour rain simulator, and then after it dropped that inch, you turned it off, and it was always neat to look at the side that had all the debris on it, because you could move the debris and the water had already gone into the ground, whereas the bare ground just pooled up and made puddles. So mulches, they're really good at preventing your small weeds from emerging, and they make it a lot easier to pull your large weeds. I know my wife does not like to pull weeds, and neither do I. So we're always pretty good about making sure we have an adequate amount of mulch. You need at least 4 inches. Make sure you're not putting it around the crowns of your or the growing points of your landscape plants. Other thing, there was some hubbub a while back about dyed mulches. The main thing that you need to be concerned about is the recycled wood. Most of the time, those are made from recycled woods, and decks, crate, old pallets, and those types of things. All the CCA, the chromates, copper arsenates, were all done away with in 2003. However, whenever they get recycled wood, we don't know what it's going to be. So that's the only thing that could be an issue. Bob and I were talking at one point in time, nails and all kinds of other stuff. Sometimes old products are out there, but they're using like iron oxide for the red type mulches. They're using iron oxide, and they're using some carbon-based products and everything for the darker colored mulches. Really, to be honest, a good hardwood mulch is the best. Kind of larger chunks, 4 inches deep, and you won't have to pull weeds, but maybe once a year. So if anything, that would save you some labor. So here's, the bad way to do mulch and the good way to do mulch. Just make sure that root flare is visible at the base of the trunk. And that goes for all your small landscape plants and also your large shrubs and trees. So just remember, plant selection is very important. And we're going to go ahead and move on to plant selection with Miss Linda Crum. And I'm going to move over to the other computer, and I'm going to help answer questions. So you'll probably, if I haven't answered your questions, you're probably going to start receiving responses from me. All right.
Good morning, everybody. Well, when they asked me to talk about plant selection, I don't think that enough people use native plants in their yard. And the longer I garden and the older I get, the more value I see in native plants. So I'm going to try to persuade you to incorporate more natives in your landscape. Mark Bowen, who wrote Habitat Gardening for Southeast Texas, says that at least 50% of your landscape should be native plants. And so you need to do a little inventory and see where you stand there. But we're well intentioned. We don't want to do anything wrong in our landscape. We want to add beauty to it. This is my backyard several years ago. I don't have any grass in my yard at all. But we want to provide for wildlife. And gardening is certainly cheaper than therapy. And by the way, it's spring, and there was this sale at the nursery, so why not go buy some plants? And gardening with natives is just fun. I was visiting my sister in Boston, and lo and behold, right downtown Boston, there's a prairie. You can see the liatris there and lots of native plants, and I was just amazed. Had to take a photo. Now, no gardener would intentionally harm the environment, so you need to think about, is this plant got any drawbacks? And there's a popular plant that gives us wonderful fall color. Its pollen is loved by the bees and the beekeepers, but it has some drawbacks, and that's the Chinese tallow tree. And your garden is not an island and it may have far-reaching consequences. Norway Maples. This is native to Europe and it was brought over here in the mid 1700s and used by Frederick Olmsted in designing Central Park in New York. But it leaves out really early and provides very dense shade. And so the little spring flowers cannot bloom because of the shade. And the leaf chemistry makes it not edible by the insect larva. And you may think, well, I don't want insects eating my trees anyway. Well, we wouldn't have butterflies if we didn't have caterpillars eating our foliage here. So plant a sugar or a red maple instead. Much better choice. Garlic mustard, it's an invasive herb. It'll grow in sun or shade. The seed lasts for 10 years, my gosh. And it fools butterflies into thinking that it's a host plant, but the caterpillars cannot survive. And it threatens the forest canopy by secreting toxic phytochemicals that kill off the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. And these are not all fungi are bad. These are very beneficial fungi that help colonize the root system and exchange the nutrients that the plant needs. And Chinese tallow also produces a toxin. Japanese barberry is invasive. Deer don't eat it, and you're always looking for deer-proof plants, but please don't do this because it harbors abnormally high numbers of Lyme-infested ticks and is very invasive. So indigenous plants have evolved over the thousands of years in a habitat, and native is frequently applied term to our indigenous plants, but it may be native to South Texas, but it may not be indigenous to Dallas area. And wildflower is kind of ambiguous. You can assign wildflower to just about anything, even the little chickweed that blooms in the wintertime here. Do you know that's edible? And it's an anti-inflammatory, so it's not all bad. Some plants are native to more or indigenous to more than one continent. And one of these plants is yarrow. And I thought it was always a European native, but no, it is native to the United States. I'm going to fly through this presentation because it's quite expansive and I didn't want to cut out any slides. So you can go back and read this stuff later on. Indigenous plants form the foundation of the food chain for our wildlife. And as the plants migrated, so did the wildlife. And they became dependent on it. Our wildlife, and that is one of the main reasons that I am very into native plants, is that our wildlife depend on it. Our forests appear outwardly resilient, but there's a silent struggle going on for survival. And if you've got plants, only indigenous and native plants to the area, then they sort of compete on a level playing field. But you introduce something like Chinese tallow or something that's going to produce toxins through their root system, then you put the natives at a disadvantage. And the main reasons: they provide the best, often the only available food for habitat for wildlife, and they're adapted to the habitat. So maintenance and resources are reduced. You're not going to have to water them as much as you might a non-indigenous plant. So let's look at some of the plants, and I kind of group them according to what type of wildlife likes them. Hosting butterflies, you want to provide host plants for larvae and provide nectar plants for the adult. Milkweeds are a host plant for your monarch butterfly. They lay their eggs on the milkweed, and the little caterpillars hatch out from those eggs and begin munching on the leaves, and they'll eat it to the ground, but don't worry, it'll be back. But it also produces flowers that the mature butterflies can snack Spice bush swallowtail and sassafras are host plants for butterflies. And sassafras gives you reliable fall color. So plant that instead of that darn Chinese tallow everybody wants to plant. I was speaking to a ladies group in the Woodlands one time, and this lady just kept telling me that it was so good for fall color she wasn't going to take it out of her landscape. And I said, let me put it in another word. I said, you're the mighty oak of your family, the matriarch. I said, suppose your husband brings home some little floozy wearing a red dress. How long do you think you're going to last? She said, oh, point well taken. Hackberry, question mark butterfly, it's a host plant for that. So plant some hackberry. A lot of people don't like hackberry. They consider it a trash tree, but the question mark butterfly thinks it's wonderful. Sweet bay magnolia for giant swallowtail. They will also snack on your citrus. And their larvae, their little caterpillars, look like bird poop, so they're well camouflaged against the birds. But that is a good plant to use for hosting butterfly larvae. Nectar plant considerations. I used to have a tendency to go to the nursery and I'd buy one plant of this and one plant of something else and go home, and it's very hard to landscape when you just got 10 plants of 10 different species. So plant in large masses instead of buying, individual plants, different species. Buy one species or maybe just two and plant in a mass, because that way the butterflies don't have to go looking so hard for their nectar plants. And they really prefer pink and purple. Sorry, Mrs. Potter, but they do. And yellow flowers that are open all day attract butterflies. This is my favorite perennial, purple coneflower or echinacea. It comes in these pink petals with this orange cone. A lot of people wouldn't put orange with pink, but God thought it was a wonderful idea when he made this flower. They also come in white, and there are a lot of different cultivars for purple coneflower, and we've done tests here at AgriLife Extension on this particular perennial and have found that the cultivars last 1, maybe 2 years, but the old species, Echinacea purpurea, lasts forever. So just buy the old-fashioned one. Gay feather or liatris puts on these wonderful purple spikes in the middle of July when it's so hot and it starts blooming, and the butterflies just absolutely love this. And when it goes to seed, just cut off the whole seed head, dig a shallow trench and put it in there. And I would suggest that you put a label there, because next spring when those seeds start to germinate, they come up and looks like a little grassy weed, and you think, what is that? And you pull it out, and it's your liatris that you planted. This is a native species of Lantana urticoides. It's one of the best butterfly nectar plants, and it gets quite large, so you'll need some room for that shrub. Buttonbush is one of my favorites. It says it's a multi-stem shrub, but it's actually a little tree. It grows about 6 to 12 feet, and the flowers look like disco balls to me, and they have these wonderful flowers. If you've got a boggy space in your landscape where you can't get anything to grow, plant a buttonbush. It'll love it. Roughleaf dogwood, this doesn't produce the big dramatic flowers like our eastern dogwood does, but it's easier to grow. It has small flowers in clusters, and it forms thickets, so it's a very good plant for nectar. Frog fruit. This is a cute little flower. It's about 1/2 inch across. It's a good ground cover. Excuse me, it's not very dramatic, but you will never see frog fruit blooming without a butterfly on it. They absolutely love it. Trees and shrubs for fall color. Here's a whole list here. We're going to go through some of these, and one of my favorite is sassafras. Now, Sassafras is dioecious. It's either male or female, but it forms clusters. And so you'll have a sassafras popping up here, popping up there, and then you've got a whole grove of sassafras. And it is very good for fall color, host plant to a butterfly, and nice little understory tree. It produces these inconspicuous little tiny yellow flowers in the spring, and then the fall color in the fall is just amazing. Different colors, oranges and reds. Flowering dogwood, or your eastern dogwood, produces these beautiful big blooms in the spring. You get red berries that birds like to eat, and then this wonderful fall color. And these were all taken in my yard at home. The eastern dogwood was growing there when we bought the property, and it's still there. Red Drummond maple gives you dramatic spring color with the flowers and also the fall color. It prefers a moist spot, so again, if you've got a moist spot in your yard you need to find a good plant for, try the Drummond red maple. Parsley Hawthorne has these little white flowers in the spring. The berries follow those. The birds love them. It produces quite a good show of fall color too. It's got thorns, so be careful when you're working around this little tree. A lot of people don't like sweetgum trees. I love sweetgum trees because of the fall color. And it does like a moist, acidic soil. And if you don't know what to do with the sweetgum balls, well, you can just paint them gold and hang them on your Christmas tree or something. But I have a friend, she's a master gardener, I won't say her name, but she doesn't like the sweetgum balls because when she goes barefoot in the yard, it hurt her feet. Well, girl, you know, you're a grown woman, put the shoes on. Chalk maple, this is a great little maple. It doesn't get huge like a lot of our maples do. It's Greg Grant's favorite native plant, so I thought it was worth planting in my yard. And it has done well. It gives good fall color, the yellow, and it's just a great little maple tree. Strawberry bush, it gets its name from the fruits it produces, these little spiky colored red fruits with the orange seed here, and the birds like it. Possum haw holly loses it's a deciduous holly, loses its leaves in the winter, but and the hollies are dioecious too, which means they're either male or female, and it's the females that produce the berries, so buy it when it's in berry so you know you're getting a female. Otherwise, you're just going to have bare stems. The males aren't very showy. Witch hazel, great little tree with these fringy little yellow flowers in the spring. They're fragrant and gives you yellow leaves in the fall. Smooth sumac, dramatic red foliage in the fall. Really a great little tree. And again, it's dioecious too. Hummingbird gardening. You want to choose plants with trumpet-shaped flowers, and hummingbirds are attracted to the color red, and they'll sip nectar from any color flower once they're in the garden. But I have a friend that puts out a red tablecloth in the spring, a plastic tablecloth in her backyard to attract the hummingbirds to her yard, and then she'll take it up once they find it. Crossvine, this is a evergreen vine. It produces trumpet-like flowers, good to grow on a fence, and then you don't have to tie it to the fence. If you've got little tendrils that will hug the fence and hold on. Scarlet Buckeye. This is a great little shrub or a small tree. Blooms in the spring with these red blooms. It's really pretty. And it does not like our hot weather in August and will completely defoliate. And you think, oh, my Scarlet Buckeye died. No, it's not dead. It will leaf out again in the spring. It just defoliates early. Columbine. Here's our native columbine right here, the Candidensis species. There's also a yellow one that's good for our area, but it's really native to more West Texas. Indian pink. This is a red and yellow flower, trumpet-shaped flower that will grow in shady areas. I have one that blooms in the shade. Living in the woodlands, we have lots of shade. Turks Cap. I say if you can't grow Turks Cap, you just turn in your gardening badge and go to quilting or something, because this is a very tough perennial, and it will grow in sun or shade. It blooms better in the sun, but the foliage stays looking better in the shade, and it'll bloom all summer. It's very drought tolerant, very good plant. Scarlet sage, this is Salvia coccinea. It's a tender perennial, but it reseeds prolifically. It comes in pink, white, and red. Coral honeysuckle. This is not the invasive Japanese honeysuckle. This is our native Lonicera, and it produces these beautiful trumpet-shaped pink flowers. It has red berries. It's not aggressive at all. Great for your landscape. Coral bean. It's a thorny shrub, so watch where you plant it. But it gives you these really dramatic pink blooms in spring. And it will bloom on new wood. If it gets too big for you, just cut it back to wherever you want it, and it'll bloom reliably. Spring blooming trees and shrubs. This is great little category here. Eastern redbud. It's deciduous and puts on its blooms before it leaves out in the spring. The flowers are edible. They aren't very tasty, but they're edible. So you can sprinkle them on your salad and make it look really pretty. Of course, Mrs. Potter wouldn't like them because they're pink. Is that right, Mike? That's right. Mexican plum produces white blooms in the spring, and then these small little fruits come on later in the summer, ripen from July through September. The birds like them. They get all of my Mexican plums. I never am able to make anything from them. Fringe tree. I love this little tree because it produces these little fringy flowers that look so unusual, and it's one of the last trees to bear new leaves in the spring, so give it some time. It's a larval host to a sphinx moth. Rusty blackhaw viburnum. It's a small tree, actually, and it leaves out after the flowers show up. The flowers will show up first, and then it'll leaf out. And it produces these little bluish black drupes or berries that the birds really like. I have one of these in my yard, and it blooms in February. I'm always looking forward to it. Maple leaf viburnum, this is a shrub. It only gets about 2 feet tall. And I used to have this in my yard, and it just up and died on me. How rude. But anyway, it's also a larval host to the spring azure butterfly. I'm still looking for it. I can't find it anywhere. Virginia sweetspire. This is a shrub that tends to sucker and kind of spread in your landscape. It doesn't do it aggressively, but you will have more than one if you start with one. Beautiful little white blooms. Trees and shrubs for the birds. This is one of my favorites, Carolina buckthorn. It's deciduous. The flowers are not showy at all, just small yellowish clusters at the base of the leaves, but the fruit is really pretty when it starts putting it on. American beautyberry. I have a lot of this, and I love this plant. Not only are the berries good for the birds, but you can make jelly from this plant. It's very good jelly. I found a jar in my pantry that said beautyberry jelly 2016. Well, that was 4 years ago, almost 5. And it looked fine. It tasted fine, and I'm still alive. So it lasts a long time. There is a recipe on, if you go back in the archives with Kathy Huber's columns with the Post, You can find the recipe for this jelly, but don't use the liquid Certo to gel the jelly. It won't work. Use the original powdered Certo. Otherwise, it's a good recipe. American holly, again, and member of the holly family, male and female on separate plants. You want the one with the red berries, make sure you get you a female. And when they're in berry. Wax myrtle. This smells like bayberry candles. Very good, the leaves do. And it's a very good screening plant. It'll grow in the shade, it'll grow in the sun. The birds love the berries. And there's a standard variety and a dwarf variety. Cherry laurel. This is an evergreen tree, and it produces these black berries, and every one of them will germinate if they hit the ground. So it's attractive to the birds and nice little white flowers in the spring, but I'm pulling up little cherry laurel seedlings all the time because I don't want that many in my yard. So caution here, it's native, great tree for birds, but a little too aggressive to suit me. Elderberry. You got to get out there early before the birds do if you want to make some elderberry wine. But it has these beautiful white berries. It likes some very moist environment too. And part shade, little bit of sun, very attractive to birds. Wildflowers. Here's our state flower, the Texas bluebonnet. You know, there's about 6 or 8 different species of this, and all the little old ladies in the wildflower society were fussing about which one was going to be the state Texas flower, and it took an act of the Texas legislature to tell them that all of them were. So they settled it. It's a larval host to some butterflies. It blooms reliably, and it's good for the soil too because it's a legume. Adds nitrogen to the soil. Cardinal flower. Dramatic red flowers. They're small, but there's a whole spike of them, so it blooms May through October, and it likes a very moist soil. And if you're going to mulch, which Michael said is always good for our landscape, just make sure you don't pile the mulch away from the crown. Keep it away from the crown of the plant of this cardinal flower because you will kill it if you pile mulch too much on the stem. Wine cup. This was taken in my yard several years ago, and I don't know what happened to this wine cup. I may have dug it up. I don't know, but it's very drought tolerant. Dramatic pink blooms. The flowers close up in the evening and they open up in the morning, and after they're pollinated they'll remain closed. But this is a tough little wildflower. Blue mist flower is one of my favorites, and my friends go, "Why? It's so aggressive and it just reseeds everywhere." And I say, "Yes, that's why I like it." So it's attractive to bees and butterflies, gives you good flower color in the fall. Grows to about 3 feet high, and if you don't want it to reseed so much, just cut the seed heads off before they mature. Indian blanket or fire wheel. It's a reseeding annual. It will reseed. It's great nectar plant for butterflies. Loves the heat. And give it some room. It'll be 2 to 3 feet in diameter if you let it grow to maturity. Evening primrose. This is another very drought-resistant wildflower. It does spread, so beware that you'll have more evening primrose than you may want, but it's very, very pretty when it does bloom. Mexican hat. You can see why it's called Mexican hat. It looks like a sombrero of type. And it is a very drought-tolerant wildflower. And it comes in the plain yellow and then the red and yellow. Ornamental grasses. If you want movement in your landscape, pick some ornamental grasses to grow. Inland sea oats is a good one for the shade. Doesn't like the sun all that much. Um, and it is a great reseeder, so you'll have lots of it in your landscape after a while. But if you don't want it, when the seeds start turning brown, cut them off and send them to the, not the landfill, I want to say the recycling, where they make compost. Put them out on the curb for green waste. Switchgrass. It has very fine little purple flowers on there. Um, Provides cover for birds. It's a larval source for the skipper butterflies. Gulf muley. This always looks like pink cotton candy blooming in the fall, and is a great, great native grass to grow in your landscape with this beautiful color of pink in the fall. On grasses, the only maintenance you really require of them is to cut them back around the first week in March. You want to wait to cut them back because they have hollow stems, and if you get rain and then a freeze, then it's going to damage your grass. So it's just best to leave them there until around the 1st of March and cut them back. Little blue stem, it's a bunch grass with very fine textured foliage. Gets the name from the bluish color of the stems, and planted in mass. It's a larval host for one of the butterflies too. Bushy blue stem. Um, it's found in very moist soils, ideal for wetland gardens. Rattlesnake Master. I was out working in my yard one day, and the Rattlesnake Master was in bloom, and there were bumblebees. And I watched one bumblebee spend an entire 5 minutes on one bloom of the Rattlesnake Master. That must be good stuff. So it's a very spiky foliage. It looks like a grass, but it's kind of yucca looking like leaves, and it likes moist soil and full sun. So Ladybird Johnson is a good place to go for native plant information. One of the questions that we're getting in the phone room, since I have a couple of minutes left, one of the questions we get is, can I cut back the frost damage on my plants now? Well, you can, but I don't recommend it because that ugly brown foliage at the top of the plant is protecting the foliage at the bottom that hasn't received any frost damage. So it's best just to leave it there until all of our freezes are over and then cut your plant back. And as far as weeds, we get a lot of questions about weeds, how to control weeds. Well, I'm an organic girl. I fall off the wagon when it comes to nutsedge, but if you pull your weeds before they go to seed, you'll cut down on the number of weeds. And like Michael said, if you'll just mow your grass before the weeds go to seed, you'll cut down on the weed population. So that's all I have. I don't know if I have any questions. What? Can you trim beautyberry into a shaped shrub? Yes, you can. You can cut beautyberry down to the ground if you want to, and it will grow back more bushy. Any other questions, Michael? Eucalyptus. It does, but isn't it subject to freeze? Oh, because soil's too wet. Yeah, it's better grown in a container, I guess, if you want to grow. Or go to Australia where it probably grows just fine. Um, Mimosa tree is invasive and should be removed, is the question. It is considered an invasive tree. Um, After a while, it starts looking kind of bad. It has beautiful little flowers in the spring, but it's not it's not a desirable tree to plant in your landscape. Michael's looking for other questions. Any other questions, Michael? Best grass for shady areas, virtually no sun. Well, St. Augustine is your most shade tolerant grass. It tolerates some shade, but it has to have at least 6 hours of sun. You can plant a ground cover, do some hardscaping, um, but one of the ground covers that I like is called Blue Shade Ruellia. I don't like Katie Ruellia. I don't like Mexican Petunia, which is a Ruellia, but I do like the Blue Shade Ruellia. It's more of a ground cover, has little purple flowers. That's a good ground cover. Wedelia is another good ground cover. It will freeze in the wintertime, but it produces yellow flowers and it grows in the shade. Um, Also, jasmine, Asiatic jasmine. My neighbor next door down in the woodlands has jasmine as their ground cover over their whole front yard. It looks great. They just weed eat it when it needs maintaining. Are we ready for Bob? What is sweet olive? Yes, yes, you can grow that in this area. It reseeds prolifically, so the answer is yes. Is Mexican Ruellia, Mexican Petunia, is it invasive? And it reseeds prolifically, so yes, it is invasive. Tulip tree not blooming, 2 years in the ground. Uh, yeah. Is it getting sun? And what's the soil like? Um, is it clay? Is it holding too much water? I don't know. We'll talk about it, Kathy. I know I'll see you soon. Will Master Gardener classes be offered this year? Unfortunately, no, but hopefully next year. We all get our COVID vaccine, which I got this morning. We'll be good to go. What type of? She's planted milkweeds in the fall, and they seem to have died. Will they come back? Probably yes, they will. What did you plant? Was it the Mexican milkweed, the tropical milkweed? She didn't say. Okay, it'll be back. Okay, it is time for Bob Dailey to tell you how often and how much and whatever to do with your landscape with water.
Got it. I'm a Luddite. Hi, I'm Bob Dailey, and I'm sorry. Where is it? Oh. Okay. Now I think they got me straight. I feel humbled following Michael and Linda, but I'm happy to be here, and I want to welcome everybody. Today I want to talk about proper lawn irrigation and more, because I want to talk about some related subjects to that and why it's important. First of all, how much water does St. Augustine grass need per week? And according to Texas A&M Aggie turfgrass, it needs 1 inch a week. But that doesn't mean you have to water it 1 inch a week, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, I want to talk about deep roots or shallow roots. These are two pictures of a study done with Texas A&M of different grasses, of St. Augustine grass planted in two different plots. This is St. Augustine that was watered 1 inch once a week with some caveats, which I'm going to mention. And this is St. Augustine watered 1 inch every day. So if you look at the left-hand picture, you'll see a deep root system. St. Augustine grass has a deep root system if it has good soil and if it doesn't have too much watering. Michael talked about compaction, and one of the real problems that I'm finding in lawns is that people are watering it so much that it's killing the microorganisms in the soil and destroying the soil structure and compacting it. And as a result, the grass roots cannot penetrate the soil. And so you have short grass roots, and which are easy to pull out. If you can go in your yard and just put your thumb and forefinger on a blade of grass and pull it up and see how short that root stem is, then you know you have some compacted soil. So anyway, but when we're talking about 1 inch a week, let's look at the average monthly precipitation in Montgomery County. I put precipitation. We did get some sleet and snow this last week, but we're going to go with all precipitation. In January, you see that we had 3.85 inches. This is the average. And you can look all the way down and see that we had 48.8 inches per year. And that equals the average of this average is 4.06 inches per month, or 1 inch per week. I think Michael mentioned that he watered his lawn 2 times last year. And that's really all you really need because of the rainfall. I put out a newsletter every Monday on irrigation schedules, and I think we recommended last year 12 times, 13 times maybe, to irrigate. So you don't need to irrigate every week because of the significant rainfall we receive here. Now, at what temperature does St. Augustine grass go dormant? 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's interesting because the number of times the temperature fell below 55 degrees in the Fahrenheit in the last 4 months, you can see from this chart. In October, we had 13 days, November 12, December 26, and to date in January, we've had 15. So St. Augustine grass began to go dormant in October this year, and probably will go out of dormancy sometime in March, early March, maybe late February. Depends on the cold weather. But I need to say something here that sometimes in some years it's very warm in October and even into November. And so you need to use common sense in deciding when your grass is dormant. Lawns do not need to be watered when they're dormant, unless it gets really crispy and we have some warm days. So we recommend that you don't water in those months unless you absolutely have to. Turn off your irrigation system. You turn off your automatic controller in November, keep it off until the 1st of March, and if you must irrigate, operate your system manually. That only makes sense because, as Michael was pointing out, if you start watering every day or even every week during cold months, you're probably going to get some fungal reaction in your grass. You know, fungus is the major plant disease vector in Southeast Texas. And why? Because we have a very humid climate here, and fungus grows well in humid climates and with water. So you have to think about that when you're irrigating your grass. And here, as I said before, there's a caveat. In some years, October and November will be very warm, so use common sense in this. Now, I want to talk about saving money on your water and sewage bill. This is actually my water and sewage bill from last month, and I paid $39.56, which is not very much, but my irrigation system is turned off. In fact, I turned it off 10 years ago, and I never had a problem with irrigation. But there's some economic advantages for lowering your water use in the wintertime. Your sewage bill, in most cases, is based on how much water you use in a given month. Many MUDs and most municipalities know that less water is used in winter months of December, January, and February. In order to save customers money, the MUDs often average the water usage during the winter, and then they charge that average throughout the rest of the year. And I suggest you talk to your MUDs, if they're not doing that, to ask them if they could. Some MUDs actually have it already figured in to their water bill. So you might want to check. I know that all the municipalities, or most of the municipalities in Montgomery County do this. I know that Conroe does it, the Woodlands does it, Oak Ridge North does it, and several other communities in Montgomery County. So you might want to check with your MUD or your city to see if they do this, and if not, encourage them to. Here's some advantages of winter sewage averaging. In January, well, let's just say Mr. and Mrs. Jones used an average of 10,000 gallons, and that's generally the average for a 4,000 square foot yard, 10,000 gallons of water a month. That way, they got charged $10,000 for their water use and $10,000 for their sewage usage. Excuse me, 10,000. They charged for 10,000 gallons. Yeah, sorry. So that's 120,000 gallons a year for both. Now, so Mr. and Mrs. Jones attended this seminar, and they saw these figures, and they saw that if they reduced their watering of their lawns in January, February, and December, January, and February, they could save 29,000 gallons of water previous to their previous year. And so as a result, they got 91,000 usage and 91,000 sewer. Now, if you look at that, that 91,000 is about 29,000 less than the 120. So in those numbers, the savings they got paid for their water usage in July, August, and September, which are the hottest months, which is when they should have watered. And it paid for the 3 months of sewage usage. So it's a great way of saving money during the year. And here, if you're water averaging, if your municipality is water averaging, then we're looking at 5,000 gallons per month, because the water district took your average of your 3 months, December, January, and February, at 5,000 gallons and charged you 5,000 gallons per month for sewage for the rest of the year, and that saved you 60,000 gallons, which not only actually paid for your entire sewage usage for the year. So it's not a bad deal. So if they don't do this, if your MUD doesn't do this, or your municipality, you might want to talk to them about it. Now, because Mr. and Mrs. Jones did this, Mr. Jones was very happy. His wife got to go on vacation. The kids did not get to use the flooded area in the back of their yard, in their backyard, because of overwatering, and they weren't very happy. But other than that, they saved a lot of money. Now, I want to talk about repairing misaligned or broken sprinkler heads. And here's something that I found very interesting. Here's some examples of some misaligned and broken sprinkler heads. As you can see, this sprinkler is watering half onto the grass and half onto the street. I guess it's a driveway. So half of that water is being wasted. That water went into the Gulf of Mexico a long time ago. And here's another example, and another example of water being wasted, putting on driveways or streets. That water is gone forever. And here's that mud puddle in the backyard where there's a broken sprinkler head and the water's just gushing out. Those things need to be repaired or realigned and make your children happy again so they can play in the water. Make sure water is reaching all your plants. Here's an example. This is the Vivarette's home in the Woodlands. And when they first moved there, they had a lot of plants, but they were all short. And so they put in these raised heads out there to water the plants. Unfortunately, what's happened is after many years, those plants have grown up. And what's happening is the water is being prohibited from going into the plants that are in the back of the garden. And so what happens is that because they're not getting water, they're not thriving as much as the ones in the front. So our recommendation is install a drip irrigation system for your landscaping plants. There's a study done in Florida at Florida A&M, and I think Texas A&M joined that study, about drip irrigation. And they calculate that you can save 30 to 50% of the water usage on landscape plants by using drip irrigation instead of sprinklers. So you might think of that, and it's very easy to install. It's very cheap. You can get them at any of the big box stores, put them in. I've done it myself, so if I can do it, I know you can. And here's some examples of drip irrigation. And here's an example of drip irrigation for a tree. A lot of people worry about trees not having enough water. The basic idea of a tree is to get the roots down deep enough so it can find the groundwater. And even in gardens, I know at some of the community gardens that I've seen and some of the individual gardens, they have drip irrigation. And I think that's important too. So where does the rainwater go when it hits an impermeable surface like a street or a driveway? It goes into the Gulf of Mexico. It's gone. And I want to talk now about wetting fronts. That's part of it. A wetting front is, let me give you an example. This is a lawn across the street from my home. And it's a very nice lawn, but I kept seeing water running off the surface every time he irrigated. So I asked him if I could look at his irrigation system, and he said, sure. So I went and looked. All the heads were correctly set. There were no leaks in the system, but he still got runoff, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I did figure it out. It's because the wetting front of the soil was only maybe 2 inches deep. What was happening is that underneath that soil layer, that 2-inch soil layer, there was clay. And the clay was prohibiting the water from dripping down into the deeper into the soil. So it was hitting that clay, saturating that 2 inches of water, and then the rest of it was running off. And as you can see, it runs off way down the street. So I don't know how many gallons he was wasting by not having enough deep soil in there. But that's something to think about. I have seen so many lawns with runoff because of this. I broke a trowel. I do a lot of soil testing in the area, and people call me, and I go out and do a soil test for them. But one of the things I've found is that almost all of the lawns I have looked at are compacted. And the compaction is because of a number of things I mentioned before, but also because when they installed the lawns, they installed it directly over clay. And because that's what they used to build the house on and structure the yard. So they laid it right on top of clay, generally without any soil underneath it. Whatever little soil there is probably came from either erosion or from rotting grass and stuff like that. So it's a real problem, and people need to really look at that. Michael was talking about when to put compost or loam or sandy loam or sand down on your lawns. That helps the lawn expand, gets the soil fluffy, and allows the water to go down deeper into the soil and move that wetting front from 2 inches down to 6, 10 inches. So again, let's look at this picture again. We have a properly watered lawn and we have a dead compacted lawn. Which would I rather have? I'd rather have the deep roots. And one of the things about the deep root system is that St. Augustine grass is a very, very strong grass. And what happens is that if you have a deep root system in St. Augustine grass, it can resist many of the problems that are associated with St. Augustine, like take-all patch and large patch, all of those things. It can resist those diseases, and also it can force out weeds. I've seen it happen. When you aerate and put down good compost or loam on your soil, a half an inch, quarter inch, something like that, then it will force out weeds. I've seen that so many times. So think about that. It's the soil. You know, they say don't ever put a $10 plant in a $1 hole. Well, when you plant your grass, or when you have grass, a lawn, if you keep amending that soil and destroying that compactedness in the soil, then you will have strong root system, and you will have a strong grass system, and it'll be much more resilient in the future, and it'll save you money because you don't have to resod or use any kind of chemicals or anything else. So what causes the soil to compact? Too much water. Mowers are heavy, and when you run over the grass so many times, it's going to help compact the soil. And sometimes people who mow are also heavy. So if I'm walking behind the lawnmower, I'm helping to compact it too. And I said too much water and too little water can also compact the soil. And lawn activities, playing baseball on the lawn or croquet or whatever you do, have the children running around on the lawn, can also help compact the lawn. Driving your pickup truck on the lawn. Those things will compact the lawn. So you need to be careful about those things. And using the practices that Michael mentioned by aerating and using soil amendments, then you can help reduce that compaction and maybe eliminate it completely. Now, how to deal with it? Michael talked about aeration. Roots cannot live without air. And air also allows organic matter to penetrate into the soil. And here's an example which Michael showed you earlier. You can rent these things, or you can hire somebody to do it, or you can just use this object. It's a little more work intensive. I actually have one of these. You just step on it and move back and a foot and do it again and again and again. It's a little more work, but it can do. But this is an example of a core that's taken out of the soil. And as you can see, Michael explained that to you, how to do that. Add organic matter to your lawn. Apply 1/4 to 1/2 inch of compost or other degraded organic material into your lawn in late August through September, mid-September, and in late April through May. through early May, I guess. And that will help the lawn turn green and rich and disease-free. Now let's talk about organic material for a minute. Organic material provides food for the micro and macroorganisms that live in your soil. And one of the things I always say is if you have earthworms in your soil, then you have good soil, because earthworms will help restore the microorganisms in the soil, because it eats the detritus in the soil and passes it through its gut and inoculates that soil. And then when it passes out of its gut, it becomes really good soil. So if you have earthworms, that's great. Don't go and buy them. If you put enough organic material on the soil, then you will have, the earthworms will come. That's just a thing I've learned throughout the years. You know, Charles Darwin wrote a book on, it was called On Earthworms, and he wrote it before he did Origin of the Species. And it sold more copies than our Origin of the Species. And what he would do, he would go out in his yard in the evenings with a lantern and put down little bits of grass and leaf litter and stuff like that outside of the vertical holes that earthworms create in the soil. And he'd watch the earthworms come up and pick those little bitty pieces of detritus and bring it down into the soil. And that's how he figured out and told everybody about how these earthworms really help integrate organic matter into the soil. So it's a very interesting story, and if you get a chance, you might want to read it. It's a little difficult to read now, but you may want to check it out. Also, organic material increases the soil's water holding capacity. I'll talk a little bit more about that. It also recycles organic matter, composting. It actually helps composting by composting. It composts itself. And it provides nutrients for the plants, because 60% to 70% of a plant's nutrients are in its leaves. And most compost has a lot of leaf mold in it. So it's a great way to provide more nutrients for your plants and lower your the usage of fertilizers. I want to talk about this. 1 cubic foot of soil plus 2% organic matter in your soil equals 3 quarts of water. It will hold 3 quarts of water. I didn't have any pictures of water bottles, so I used some empty fifths of Johnny Walker, but you can get the idea. A cubic foot of soil plus 2% organic matter will hold 3 quarts of water. Now that's a 4,000 square foot yard, which is also, if you look at it from the side, 4,000 cubic feet, can hold 12,000 quarts or 3,000 gallons of water. That means that even with the rain and the water holding capacity of your soil, you will have more than enough water being held in the soil and from rain to have to water your yard very seldom. Now here's another thing that we need to talk about, and that's cycle and soak. Instead of running each zone for 20 minutes, run each zone for 7 minutes 3 times, which comes 21 minutes. But in other words, run your whole zone for 7 minutes, start it again, run it 7 minutes, and start it again, running 7 minutes for each zone. And that gives the soil time the water's time to percolate down into the soil and increase that wetting front. If you have good soil, then that's what you want to do. You want to increase that wetting front so the water will wick down into the soil. Now, follow all these steps, and you may avoid all these lawn problems. First of all, here's steps you can take for a healthy lawn. I'm just going to repeat these. Turn off your controller in the winter. Operate it manually. Now, there are some new controllers out there called smart controllers, and what they do is they will check with an ET station near you. ET is evapotranspiration station, and what those stations do is they do the amount of sunlight, the heat, the humidity in the air, the ambient humidity, the soil moisture, wind direction and wind speed, amount of evaporation that's occurring in the soil and in the plants, and it will translate that into how much water you need to put on your lawn. Now, Texas A&M has probably 50 or 60 ET stations in the state, maybe more, and those ET stations are incredibly accurate, and I use it for my weekly email that I send out to calculate how much water, if any, is needed to put on your St. Augustine or your Bermuda or your Zoysia or anything like that. So these new smart meters will connect with that, and then it will also connect with your phone or your computer, your laptop or your PC. I was in North Carolina 2 summers ago, and I realized that I needed to water the grass at the water district, and I had forgot to try, didn't turn the system on. So I just opened up my phone and told my smart meter, my smart controller, to water the lawn and how long to water it, and it did. And so that's one of the great advantages of a smart controller. And some municipalities and areas offer rebates for things like this. And talking about native plants too, some municipalities also offer rebates for native plants, so on your water bill. Drip irrigation, I want to talk about that for just a second. Install drip irrigation in your landscaping plants. It saves so much water. It gets the water right down into the roots instead of sprinkling it all over the place and evaporating in the wind and everything else. Just install drip irrigation, and that water goes right down to the roots with very little evaporation. Compost or any organic matter or good soil, good topsoil, loam, sandy soil, add at least 1/4 inch of compost at least once a year, every 2 years, something like that. Cycle and soak. When you do water, use cycle and soak methods. Oh, well, if you let's say you have 5 zones, the question is, what's the interval between the cycles? If you have, let's say you have 6 zones in your yard, and you run it for 7 minutes, run each zone for 7 minutes. That is 6 times 7 is what, approximately an hour, close to an hour. So when you start over again, that's all you have to do. You just start all over again at the same process. So once you finish, you just start the cycle again, and you can set that on your controller to do that. So that will, the first one will do 7 minutes, and then it will take another 42 minutes to get around, and then that will have enough time for the first one to soak down into the soil. Aerate, that's most important. Okay, I'm almost finished. Okay. Repair, I want to repair breaks in all our sprinkler systems and redirect misaligned sprinklers. And most of all, do not overwater. Here are some irrigation resources that Michael will send out to you. YouTube, there's a great YouTube presentation on installing drip irrigation. And also, AgriLife Extension at tmu.edu has a great production on drip irrigation. So you may want to check those out. Cycle and Soak, the Water University at tamu.edu irrigation has a great description on how to do cycle and soak. Your WaterWise checklist, AgriTurf has a great website for your home lawns. It's a checklist to go over it and find out what you can do and repeat some of the stuff that myself and Mike talked about earlier. St. Augustine grass lawn management, AgriTurf has a great article on that. Disease, weed, and insect control as well. Aggie AgriTurf. There's a good YouTube article on wedding fronts, and that's the address for it. So you might want to check on that too. And aeration. There is a good YouTube channel to talk to you about aeration and how to do it. And there we are. There we are. Upcoming events, Michael. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, somebody wants to know how to get on your newsletter.
Send me an email. The question is, how do they get on my email list? You can send me an email at B, that's B as in Bob, Dailey, DAILEY, at woodlandswater.org, and I will put you on the list and send you that newsletter, that email every Monday. Yes, you do not have to live in the woodlands to get this email. I've got maybe 22,000 people, and maybe 2,000 or 3,000 are outside the woodlands, so you do not have to be there. I think I have one from New York, and I'm not sure why they're on there, because the conditions are different, but who knows? For far away, yes.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions here and there. I've been talking to a few of you about, when it comes to tree roots, how do you handle tree root issues? Depending on how high they are, most of the time, and like I said, I like to go back and look at the why. Why is it happening? If this is an oak tree or trees that there's producing a lot of shade, is there a possibility to trim those trees appropriately to get more sunlight up underneath there so you can start to grow grass again? Now, with the roots exposed, you can put soil back in those areas. If they're, above about 4 to 5 inches, you may want to consider just adding soil over time and then replanting, or even consider some type of hardscape or mulching that area. That's how some people take care of that. Also, let's see here. I think somebody had a question about aerating around a septic system. That is one of those things where you do have to be careful. You have to know where those pipes are, how deep they are, and somebody muted everybody. So you do have to know how those pipes are in the septic system in order to make sure that you're not poking holes and everything. Get them identified as location. Same thing with your irrigation system. You need to mark all the existing sprinklers and everything. All the existing sprinkler heads and everything. So you know where those are. Okay. So somebody said, understand that agent jumping yellow bands are invasive. How do you get rid of them? I didn't know they were. I didn't know they were. I haven't been. They haven't. USDA hasn't said anything about it. But I would assume that. You want to get rid of. You got to remember. You got to remember a lot of products out there. Don't just control one thing. They'll control a lot of things. So you have to be careful and make sure that you have the if it's a Japanese Asian jumping or whatever it may be, make sure you have them before you select a product. That's pretty much kill everything. So that would be something like a liquid 7 or a granule 7 or a granule product and kill those types of things. So what is the best time to fertilize citrus tree grapes? You typically want to fertilize those 6 weeks after they drop off fruit. That would be the best thing to do. Keep in mind for those that are there's the information on our plants. Coming up. We can kind of see that. Okay, so three things you want to use a good general citrus fertilizer or citrus fertilization. Don't use too high nitrogen, because if you make a plant grow too excessively, it's not going to fruit as well, not going to fruit. So a good, microlife, even compost around, things like that will help the citrus
fertilization right now till March would be a good time. Put some just slow release type.
Like I said, you don't want to be too excessive.
Like I said, when's the best time? When's the best time?
You can prune any of your dead wood out at any point in time, but you don't want to trim now because if you trim something and we have a hard freeze, you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to go back. You're going to have to wait.
You're going to have to wait
And just
to be selective. What you're trimming, what you're trimming.
Wait until after that
April 1st time frame.
Once you
Just trim trees. Sometimes when you do trim trees, sometimes it's pruning off of wood citrus. So you'll have to kind of do them in stages. Yes. Okay. So will there be a link to the recording? Yes. In 7 to 10 days, you will get an email that will. Oops. In 7 to 10 days, you will get an email that will have the link. I have a echo. Okay.
All right. There we go. Okay. So the one of the things you'll get in about 7 to 10 days, you'll get an email. It will have different information in it. One of them is going to be you are going to get a link to the presentation that will be online through YouTube. You will also get a link to a survey that we please ask you to fill out. And then you'll also get any documentation, PDF forms, or publications that we've mentioned in our presentation. So you'll get that information and along with the email. So just please, if you're still listening, please do fill out that form for us, that survey. That helps us direct our programs, lets us know what kind of topics that you might be looking for. We see things on our end that might be hot topic issues, and we also try to teach these classes, based on timing. There's times that you think about things and times that you don't, and so that's what we try to do. And make sure you go to the MCMGA.com website. There's links there to like the upcoming fruit and nut sale that's going to be online. And then also there's links up there that we post about our garden classes coming up, and our next ones are February 20th and then March 13th and April 10th. February 20th, we're going to be talking a little bit about vegetables, and we're also going to be talking more in depth about turf. I'll be doing that presentation. So, yeah, I have my computer here in front of me, my work computer, and also the presentation computer, and somebody muted and unmuted, and it kicked my personal computer on, so it was echoing real bad. No, somebody must have hit mute all or something. So anyway, I read citrus should be fertilized on Valentine's, Mother's, and Father's Day. Well, there's a lot of stuff that we read that may not necessarily be true. You got to be careful with some of the things you read. There's a lot of generalizations. You also have to take into account where they are talking about that. Like down in South Texas, we use ammonium sulfate, which is 2100. I wouldn't recommend that for up here. It's a totally different environment, totally different soil. So most of the time we have pretty good soils as it is. We have pretty rich soils. So only light additional fertilization is required. Now, if you really, really, really want to know what you need to fertilize with and how much, I would suggest getting a soil test for your area. And you can go to that soiltesting.tamu.edu, and that will definitely help you as far as what exactly needs to be put down. Bald cypress knees. One way when you talk about bald cypress knees, what about bald cypress knees? Bald cypress knees, if you're having a problem with them, they tell you what you can do is you can cut them down to the ground consistently. You have to use a chainsaw and knock them down to the ground, but that's about all you can do for those. It doesn't really damage the tree. Yeah, most of the time it's because there's too much moisture. So they're trying to get oxygen, so they're popping up. Try to answer everybody's questions as I go. Yep. I saw a lot of that deals about my echo over here. I'm sorry about that, guys. Like I said, I think somebody tried to mute everybody and it threw them both on at the same time or something. So, but like I said, okay, can I repeat the information on trimming citrus trees? Yes, deadwood can be trimmed at either time, at any time. In fact, tell you what the best thing y'all can do is y'all can go read my news column in the Conroe Courier, because it is actually on trimming, on growing citrus trees. It's about fertilization, trimming, and everything else. Yep, I just submitted it Wednesday. Yep, so it should come out either Saturday or Sunday. So I think they've been running it on Sunday. So if you do search my name, Michael Potter, Conroe Courier, it should pull it up. And that way you can get that information. All right, we thank you all for joining us.